All right, let's pray to begin. Dear Jesus, thank you so much for bringing us together here tonight to just learn more of you and your will for us as moms and how to protect the children you've given us, Lord. Please speak through Dani as she shares, the insight on how to learn how to, well, she'll share. Just guide her, Lord. Empty her of herself and fill her with your wisdom and your words. And just bless those that are listening here tonight and those that will listen in the future to better guide our children in safe ways in you. In your name we pray, Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Welcome to SAP Series Part 3. If you missed Part 1 and 2, I highly recommend that you go to our YouTube channel called Raising Kids for Eternity. And there you will find Part 1 and Part 2 of SAP Series. SAP stands for Sexual Abuse Prevention. And it's been a blessing to study more on this topic and to be able to share and to discuss and to interact with those that are present. Now, the topic for today is what's the profile of the child most at risk of abuse? It can be quite overwhelming for you to think of all the external factors, the risks, and the dangers that we must be aware as parents in order to keep our children safe from sexual abuse. If you start thinking about all the little factors and all the possibilities, it can actually bring a lot of anxiety. But the reality is that anyone can be sexually assaulted during his or her lifetime. Every child is at risk of sexual abuse without an exception. My child, my children, your child, anyone's child, this is what the studies say. Now, some think of it as something real far away and not really related to their family. Like, oh yes, a lot of children are sexually abused, but you're not really thinking of your own. If that's your case, you're wrong. And why is that? Because abusers are all around, right? We have churches, playgrounds, parties, homes, schools, etc. They can be anywhere. However, children and young people with certain characteristics they account for a larger share of sexual abuse victims. So everyone is at risk, but there are certain characteristics that account for the larger share of sexual abuse. Now, in previous lectures, part 1 and 2, we've emphasized the importance of sexual education and how to teach your child protective behaviors. Now, it is true that lack of sexual education makes a child more vulnerable to abuse, but I'm here to tell you that sexual education alone is not sufficient for prevention. Though it's key for prevention, it's not sufficient alone. And why am I saying that? I'm saying this because parents play a very important role, significant role, as protectors of their children via 2 pathways, right? The first pathway is through direct, strong external barriers that parents put up, such as supervision, monitoring, and involvement. So this is your external direct fact. Now, another pathway is indirectly. And how is that the case? Well, indirectly protecting your child is when you promote your child's self-efficacy, competence, well-being, self-esteem, which the balance of evidence suggests that it will help them become less likely targets for abuse and more able to respond appropriately in disclosure of abuse if abuse occurs. So basically, when we directly protect the children is when we are educating, is when we're monitoring, is when we're carefully selecting who is around them, is when we are putting boundaries and when involving with the child. But indirectly is your parenting style. So the way you parent your child shapes and molds who she becomes. And the way we parent our children can make them develop certain characteristics that will make them more vulnerable to be a target for sexual abuse. So, in summary, who is at risk? A simple way of explaining is comparing your child to a vehicle. If you go on a trip without car maintenance, windshield wipers, tire changes, if you're not changing your oil, if you're not, maintaining your brakes, you will be more vulnerable to getting to an accident, right? Now, everybody that's on the road driving is at risk of being in an accident, regardless of you doing your car maintenance. But there are those who are at higher risks. And so we're going to go through 10 characteristics of children who are at higher risks. And I don't really want you to feel that if your child has 2 or 3 of those, then, oh, she's going to be abused. It's not that, because people that drive without an oil change doesn't mean they're going to get into an accident. It could mean they're more likely to get into it, but it doesn't mean that that's it. They're going to get out there, their car's going to crash, they're going to die. And these are things, just like car maintenance, that we can change, right? Some we don't change the whole scenario, but there are things we can do to protect them even under the circumstance, okay? There's somebody asking me for the Zoom info. Do you mind if I just reply? Okay. So if you drive your car on the road perfectly maintained, you're less likely to be in an accident, but it does not take you out of the possibility. Therefore, we need to do everything we can to protect as much as we can, but it does not mean that we're going to be safe and we don't have to worry about it, okay? So what are the characteristics of a child most at risk? The number one characteristic I want to list is a child of authoritarian parents, right? Now, this is not to be confused with authoritative parents, right? An authoritative parent brings positive outcomes. So it's a balance between warmth and responsiveness, but it has clear boundaries and lower permissiveness. Now, children that are raised in this style tend to be responsible, self-reliant, and assertive, right? So what is an authoritarian parent? In contrast, an authoritarian parent is one that enforces strict obedience to authority, showing lack of concern for the opinion of and wishes of others. So you're still requiring obedience, but you're uninterested in hearing their opinion. It's very strict. There's no permissiveness at all. And a child has absolutely no freedom, right? It's just all about limits. It's high demands and very low responsiveness. No communication, no dialogue. Harshness is very common, and it leads a child to become accustomed to negative emotions in relationships. So they can never please the parent, and so they're just accustomed to not really having healthy relationships. Now, an authoritarian parent is not interested in listening to the wishes of the child. They're unwilling to negotiate at all. 5 more minutes, Dad. No, I said, no, that's it. They're like a no gun, I like to say. Everything is no all day. That's all they can constantly say. The child has to obey and be quiet. I'm your father. You don't ask me why. Just do what I said. That's it. It's either my way or the highway. This is pretty much the characteristic of an authoritarian parent. Now, often authoritarian parents resort to screaming, threatening, constant spanking, and punishments. And the reason why they do that is because authoritarian parenting creates an emotional deafening. So the child loses, the brain shuts down, and the child loses the ability to even hear the commands. And no matter how aggressively you command them or you speak to them, they're not going to listen to you. So if your child only listens to you when you scream or spank them, you're emotionally distant to her. So if you have to constantly be screaming to your child, she's already not listening to you. Her brain has shut down because you could possibly be an authoritarian parent. Now, every time you use this tactic of screaming and constantly punishing and no gun and everything, you're using your control power and not really your influence power over her. So it's a child that's constantly controlled. You cut off the connection with your child, and the child learns to no longer trust in you and is very unlikely to open up to you if she finds herself in a dangerous situation. Now, parenting without dialogue is not really the right track for child education, because the child needs to learn how to dialogue. And I heard the story of a 6-year-old girl who was a victim of abuse by her own uncle. And she decided to confide the information to her teacher in school. And she said to the teacher, my uncle is doing this and this and this to me. And the teacher, after listening to her, she said, and what do you really think about the idea of us telling your mom about it? Or your dad, your parents? Why don't we just tell them? We, like, giving her that support. And she answers, my mom spanks me when I spill milk. She has even spanked me when I forgot to brush my teeth. If she hears that my uncle is touching my little flower and that I am touching his pew-pew, she's going to kill me. And so children who are abused, who are being abused, are unlikely to open up to their parents if they are aggressive or authoritarian. You know, abusers convince the children that they are never going to be listened or believed. It's one standard sentence. If you tell them, they will never believe you. If you tell them, they are not going to listen to you. So when your child has a problem, do you want your child to run to you or to run from you? That's the question we need to ask. If you want your child to run to you, you must learn to listen to her. You must learn to not jump into conclusions, and you must learn to not rebuke when it's not needed. Authoritarian parenting will bring up a child to be distrustful, discontent, and withdrawn. And for me, this is a very strong aspect of a child that's most at risk, because it affects so many areas of her personality. When she feels that she's under the eye of a gun at home and that her parents were just constantly targeting her, she's got no freedom or anything. Now, we can also fall onto the other side of the story, other extreme, and that's number 2, if you're taking notes, a child of permissive parents. So permissive parents, they are warm, they can be nurturing, they can be loving, which is certainly positive, but they don't realize that not using limits, boundaries, and structure necessary to the child may make her not feel secure, safe, and that she can really trust her parents. And so being too permissive can be a strong negative, because it practices inadequate behavior control. And if the child does not have behavioral control, she may fail to develop self-control. And that way she is more driven to allow others to do things to her because she has no control of it. There are 3 types of permissive parenting. There is permissive indulgent, which is the type of parent that will just do whatever the child wants, give to the child whatever they want. So they lack control, but they have high responsiveness. So they're always there indulging this child, allowing them to do everything they want. There is also a second type of permissive parenting, which is permissive neglectful, which is the parent that is allowing the child to do everything they want to kind of counteract their absence, right? So usually parents who spend very little time with their children, when they are with them, then they feel like they've got to let the child do whatever they want to make up for their absence. And so this is also lack of control, but also a lack of responsiveness. And also there is a third interesting type of permissive parenting, which is the permissive authoritarian. Now, how can you be permissive and authoritarian at the same time? Well, these type of people, they are very rough, they're very bossy, but when they're busy, distracted, watching a movie, on their phone, or they're tired, now they become very permissive and they leave the child to do whatever they want. Wherever you fall under the 3 categories, these are very dangerous grounds, because it allows too much freedom, and the child doesn't grow up with a sense of boundaries. So she doesn't learn to set boundaries for herself, because she was never set boundaries from the parents. Permissive parenting is basically not having guardrails for your child, right? So parenting is allowing your child to drive on a bridge, right? But parents are the guardrails. And if those guardrails are not up, when the child makes a mistake and she's veering off the bridge, she's going to fall off. So allowing your child to go through the bridge without being in the steering wheel is not being authoritarian. But if you are not guardrails to the child, then you are permissive. So what are the consequences of permissive parenting? Kids that have no limits in life will most likely not know how to set limits when her body is touched or if she touches somebody else's. And kids that have no boundaries, they are not connected to their parents and become more at risk, right? Rules are healthy. Kids thrive in an environment that has order and that has rules, and that the rules are enforced and that they're gently enforced, not in an authoritarian way. Number 3, a child that's cared for by too many people or have limited supervision by parents. Now, I do know that there are many parents who are unable to care for their kids all day, single parents or parents that have to work, study, or have any other circumstance, and they depend on outside help. Now, depending on outside help is not necessarily the issue, but it can become if it's not carefully considered. Now, how can it become a problem? If your network of trusted individuals, and I believe every parent should have a network of trusted individuals, because like the saying goes, it takes a community to raise a child. It's impossible for the child to have only contact with mommy and daddy until she's 18 years old, right? This is not going to happen. She's going to have school teachers. She's going to have Sabbath school teachers, Sunday school teachers. She's going to have grandparents. She's going to have neighbors. And so you have to create a network of trusted individuals that you can close your eyes and trust your child to them. But if this network starts to grow too much, you need to start narrowing it down, because the wider it is, this network, the higher your child is at risk. Now you may say, well, but I trust a lot of people. This is why my network is big. One day she is at her cousins, another day she's at her aunties, another day she's at grandma's, she's at friend's house, she's at my neighbor's. The problem really is in the homes where these kids go to, other individuals may come and visit, and you don't really have control over that. You don't have control of who your child will be mingling with once you hand her off to somebody else, right? And this is why it's very important to believe and to teach sexual education to a child, especially if she's not going to be under your care constantly, because the child needs to be able to identify what is abuse and what is love, and they will have a higher chance to say no to abuse. Now, if you trust your mother, your mother-in-law, your aunt, your cousin, your friend, your neighbor, start narrowing it down. Narrow it down to just a few people who if you have an emergency, you can leave your child with. That if you need to go to the doctor or if you have to go to work. And as much as possible, try to do that in your own home instead of in their home. Because in your own home, you have control of who comes in. In other people's homes, you do not. And so for the times that I've had to leave my child with my mother-in-law, and I trust her wholeheartedly, I trust my father-in-law, but if they're gonna babysit my children for me, they babysit them in my house. My child is 5.5 years old. I've never once allowed them to be in her house if it's not under my care or my husband's care. Now, is that always the case? Is that always possible? It may not always be possible. People have other things they need to do in their home, but you have to really trust the environment that your child is in and not just the person who's caring for them. Another situation is kids who are allowed to be away from their parents and even any other trusted adult supervision. I grew up in an apartment building in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and it was several apartments. So it was this huge compound, 12 4-story apartment buildings. And so hundreds of people lived there. And my parents were careful to an extent because they prohibited us of ever entering anyone's home. Like we were not allowed to go into any neighbor's home, not inside of a home. But at a very young age, I remember playing in the compound, at the playground, at the tennis court, or whatever courts there were, alone without any parental supervision. And they thought that that was safe. Nowadays, 30 years later, maybe we wouldn't do that anymore. But I believe there are still parents that allow their children to just roam around the streets, in parks and playgrounds. And these apartment buildings, someone could have pulled me in without my consent, just trusting that I wouldn't do it. Maybe today it wouldn't be enough for me. And so we need to be very careful that your child is always under a trusted adult supervision, as well as your network of trusted individuals is narrowed down to only a few people. And as much as possible, that if you have to leave your child with someone, that you have somewhat control over the environment that they're in. Number 4, a child that has access to the internet without supervision. Now, I'm mentioning this at this point because it is important. It's a growing problem. And I think it's so big that I want to do a whole lecture just on that. The numbers are scary, the stories, the statistics, and the reality is pretty hairy. But phones, tablets, and laptops in your home are gateways for interaction between a perpetrator and your child, an abuser and your child. So abusers are investing very strongly in the pedophile network to attack kids in social media, games, and etc. So there are many cases of abuse where the abuser is sending pictures or asking pictures of nudity. And though there's no physical contact, this is also considered abuse. We looked into the definition of sexual abuse the first day, and that was one of them. Now, through the pandemic, the numbers of this type of abuse have soared because kids were given laptops or tablets and they were left alone to do school while their parents worked either in a different room or even not even in the house. Now, a study in 2020 reported that there was a 44% increase in the number of self-generated indecent images produced by children. So imagine kids were left alone with their tablets, got on social media, on these games, and the abusers started to ask them, send, promise money, promise whatever to them if they would send pictures of them in nudity. And that was an increase of 44% during the pandemic. Now, the saddest part is that these pictures were the most prolific age group were girls between 11 and 13 years old. Now imagine an 11-year-old already involved in this, and it could be even younger than that. So the child that has internet alone in a room is more likely to be exposed to pornography, and from pornography on to abusers. And this can be a big trauma to a child that becomes addicted to this, and the trauma can be even similar to physical abuse, though there is no physical contact. And a child that's abused over the internet is a lot more likely to be abused in person because she's already into this, she's already given in so much, and she's got very low self-esteem. She knows her images are out there, then she starts to feel guilt, fear that she will ever be found, and so she just gives in to this whole abusive situation. Now, notice the study that was done in England. It says in 2021, the online marketplace for sharing sexual images for cash is no longer dominated by the sex industry and adult sex workers. In the past, it used to be adult pornography, right? It's a phenomenon that goes beyond regulation. It's being utilized also by teenagers for their self-production of nude, semi-nude, on-demand kink images and videos for online clients. So they're getting paid. Teenagers are getting paid already to send pictures of themselves. So it's a huge issue, especially because nowadays all it takes is a click, and kids know their ways around these gadgets better than their parents. And to allow a child to have no supervision with the devices puts them just on the front line of this abuse war, and they can easily be a target if they are not controlled. Number 5, A child that has no effective connection with the parents, right? So aside from threatening, screaming, and constant spanking the child, there are many other ways that you can have no effective connection. Even if you don't threaten, even if you don't scream, even if you don't constant spank your child. What are some ways? One, if you don't spend quality time with your child. And by quality time, I mean setting aside time to just be with her, not with the phone, not sitting watching the movie, just doing what she wants to do. If you don't listen to your child, if you don't take the time, if you don't say, um, I'm here listening to you, look at me, look at my eye. When you can't establish a dialogue, when the opinion of your child is not important, and children, and they like to talk. I have a talker at home, and sometimes it really gets to me. It's like 8 o'clock and she's been talking since 8 in the morning, and it's 12 hours of talking. And sometimes in the evening is when she has the best of what she needs to say, and you're just like, ugh. But if you don't learn to listen to your child, they're going to look for somebody else that will listen to them. When the opinion of your child is not important, when you use sentences like, you have no reason to be crying. If you don't stop, I'm going to punish you, and there's always a reason to be crying. The reason could be, that they are trying to push their limits, but there's always a reason to be crying. But when they hear these words, you have no reason to be crying. Your suffering matters not to me. That starts to get engraved in their brains. Or when a child falls, you say, come on, get up. You must not be hurting. It hurts. You've fallen as an adult and it does hurt. It may not be hurting now, but it always does hurt. And you don't have to be, licking off your child's knee, but you do need to show some affection and some connection to the situation that they are in. Or when your child tells you something and you tell them you're a liar. I don't believe that this happened. And I think that is really dangerous, and it happens a lot more often than we believe. And it's true, kids will lie. I've had this issue that my child would lie, but I would, instead of telling her, you're lying, I don't believe you, I would keep asking more questions until she herself would come up and say, I'm just joking, or it really didn't happen this way. Or if she didn't come to the point and it was actually accusing somebody of doing it, I would be like, are you very sure that this happened? Can you be very sure that this happened? And instead of saying you're lying, I knew from the beginning it was a lie, but that's not really the way you want to approach it. Or when the child, a nice way, when the child tells her she's full and you keep pushing food down her throat. And I've been accused, or I've been a victim of that. Not the victim. I've been
Guilty.
what? I've been
Guilty.
I've been guilty of that many times. I've had two difficult eaters, and it's your job as a parent to push food down their throat, but you're not respecting their limits. You're not really connecting with their needs. Or when you prove day and night to your child that you have many other priorities over her, and your priorities may be genuine. You may be busy with church, you may be busy at work, you may be busy with another child, you may be busy with your phone, you may be busy with wherever it is, but you prove to your child that you've got more priorities. So this type of relationship develops low self-esteem in the children. And a child that has low self-esteem, she is more likely to be drawn to flattery, to special gifts, and special attention. So abusers know how to win a child's confidence and trust, and oftentimes they will give your child more attention than you do. Now, if or when sexual abuse begins, a child who has no effective connection and communication with their parents most likely keep it a secret. So they may live in the fear of getting in trouble, being judged or shamed, overburdening their parents, or even being ignored. Like, why am I going to take the time to talk to them about it? They don't listen to what I tell them anyhow, right? So this is a child that's most at risk, because when she comes or he comes to you, she knows you're not going to listen, you're not going to believe, and you're not going to care. Number 6, a child from a stressful home environment. Now, what is a stressful home environment? It's impossible to avoid some stress. If you're here and you're a parent, you know what I'm talking about. If you've got 2 children, you know even more what I'm talking about. If you've got 3, and the list goes on. But being aware of how your stress affects your child and how you can manage, it will go a long way. So there will be stressful situations, but how we learn to deal with it ourselves will reflect in how our children will be more or less likely to be a target for abuse. Now, the reason why I say that is because children with low self-confidence in their surroundings, and particularly a home, if a home is very stressful environment, the parents are like a ticking, how do you call it, ticking bomb or yeah, is that what you said? I hope so. Another way I like to say, in Brazil we use a lot of pressure cook, but not the electric one. Is the one that's like a pot and it has the thing. Have you ever seen one of those explode? They do a lot of damage. So a lot of parents are like pressure cooks, and when they explode, the people that get burned the most are the ones closest to the pressure cook, right? So if you're in the kitchen, you're gonna get burned a lot. And the people that are the closest to that pressure cook, to the parent, is the child. And so your stress, and it can be that you're not even stressed at the child. The child may not even be the reason for stress. She's just the cherry on top. They feel insecure. They are unstable. Even if stability comes with other unwanted behaviors, they will look for more stability and security, and we'll find that in the hands of abusers. So children with a stressful home, they also feel like they can confine to the parent. And the reason why they can confine to the parent, they feel my mom or my dad, they're already so stressed. They're so stressed out. I don't want to bring this problem to them. I don't want to tell them that my cousin is asking to touch my body parts. This is really going to throw them off the roof. So I'm just going to keep quiet. And that's really dangerous, right? When the child feels that dialoguing with you and opening up to you will make you so stressed that you're going to fall apart. So that was number 6, a child from a stressful home environment. Now, number 7 cuts very deep to me. And the reason why it cuts deep is because it's a child who is at most risk for abuse are obedient labeled kids. Now, I don't know about you, but if you have a child that's a lot more obedient than another one, you tend to focus on that and compare the little one to the older one and encourage the little one to be like the older one and to praise the older one for being more obedient. And that's the case in our home. My 5-year-old, she's generally very obedient. She's a sweet girl. She's got a very soft heart. And it gets often spoken about, not in a way of praising her, but in a way of acknowledgement. But there is a very fine line, because children who are constantly labeled, you're so obedient, you're so this, and you're so that, they carry this label as a burden. And the reason I will say that is when a parent labels a child, they try to fit into this category that the parents have expected, and they try to live up to it, even if they don't want to or agree. So I am very obedient. My mom believes I'm very obedient. I have to be very obedient. I can never do this. And so they don't want to be that way, but they're basically forced by themselves to fit into, to live up to the parents' expectation. Now, if you have a child that challenges you, praise the Lord, because it's very normal for a child to disagree with you. It's very normal for a child, and it's actually ideal for a child's upbringing for her to question, to disagree, and to make mistakes. Whether those drive you crazy or not, it is very normal. So to be the perfect child is a burden, and the child basically stops being who she is so that she can become her parents' ideal. Sometimes she has no idea of who she even is or what she would like to be, because she's terrified of disappointing her parents. So if your child is constantly praised for her good and perfect behavior, she understands that if she ever presents anything different than that, she's not going to be loved and accepted. She's trained to always obey, never disagree, always obey adults, to always say yes, and this all make her more vulnerable. She believes that she will only be loved if she does whatever others expect of her to be, or if she is whatever others expect of her to be. So when in the hands of an abuser, it's very unlikely that she's going to say no. Abusers tell her that her parents will never accept her anymore, that her parents will be angry at her, and she is not worth anything anymore. And that way, she also is unlikely to tell her parents what's been happening to her. So, what are some tips? Never tell your child, I'm going to leave you with Uncle Sam, and you have to do whatever he tells you to do. Do not question and never disobey. This is a very dangerous thing, right? Well, my mom told me I have to do whatever Uncle Sam tells me to do. So, what is another way of putting it? You have to respect the rules of the home, respect the rules of the school, and respect the rules of the place that you are being cared for. But if anything happens to you that is not respectful, do not accept it and come and tell me. Okay, so the child needs to know that they are not to just put up with bullying in school, with Uncle Sam's abuse, with any other type of even emotional abuse from anybody else, simply because she has to obey all the time, never say no to an adult. So if you have an obedient child at home, and I have a combo that's very dangerous. I have a very obedient child, and the same one is highly affectionate and becomes best friends of whoever she sees within a couple hours, And so I have to always be, teaching her that she needs to trust people. She can be more mindful of who she's hanging out with and this and that, because it makes her very vulnerable. She's always so compliant and she's always so loving, attached to people, and you're my best friend from day one. And those are dangerous characteristics, and it will put a child more at risk. Now, my younger one, she's a challenger. She questions. She does not often do what you tell her. And I am less worried about her on that sense because of these characteristics that she presents. Though evidently drives me completely insane, I see that there are some benefits to that type of personality. Now, number 8. And I want to, before I mention number 8, I want to remind you of the vehicle driving in the highway. Okay, these are characteristics. It doesn't mean that if your child is in the situation, she's doomed and she'll be abused. No, but if you are in the situation, it means you have to be even more careful and pay more attention to it and give more instruction. Number 8 is a child from blended families, right? In a blended family, communication, relationship dynamics can be complicated. There are many disagreements. Sometimes the disagreements are between parents on how they're going to educate the children, set boundaries, conflict resolution, privacy, healthy sexuality. So there's usually a tension when the families are broken and when the families are blended. There's usually a tension, and a step family member may lead to more conflict in the home. When a mom brings in a stepdad or a dad brings in a stepmom, then the children start having lower confidence in their environment, depending on how that new person is introduced. Now, blended families also increase a child's chances of encountering abuse, be it an adult, which could be a step parent, or a live-in parent, which is the mom is not married, but she constantly brings different men into the family, or the other way around, the husband that brings different women, or even a peer, and that could be your half sibling, right? Or the child of your mom's boyfriend who's living in the same house. And this happens a lot. Now, the younger, approximately 30% of children who are sexually abused are abused by family members. That's a high statistic, but the statistic grows. The younger the child, the more likely that the abuser is a family member. So for a child that's under the age of 6, 50% of the time it happened in the home by a family member. And so does it mean families that are divorced should never again have a chance to be a family again? No. But it does mean that with the more variables at play in blended families, more effort needs to be put into consistent and open communication. So to ensure consistency and clarity, all the caretakers need to be on the same page regarding education on safe boundaries, appropriate behavior, and healthy sexuality. And you need to be attentive um, to the new dynamics that are set into place when you bring in new people into your home and you already have kids. So you have to ask your child open-ended questions about the experiences they are having with these people, their feelings, the interactions with the rest of the family. And if you notice any red flag behavior among family members, you need to address it immediately, right? So I have friends who were abused their entire childhood by husbands or boyfriends or whatever that the mom kept bringing into the home, not by once, not by one, nor by two, by several. And this happens a lot more often than you think. And if not from the stepdad, it was from the son of the stepdad or the cousin of the stepdad, the step uncle that kept coming in. And so we need to be very careful in these situations. Number 9, children with disabilities. Now, it's not your choice, neither is the child's choice. But children with disability are at least 3 times more likely to be abused. And the reasons behind the statistics are multiple, including the child's need for personal care, a desire for acceptance, reliance on others, inability to escape due to physical limitations, or inability to disclose abuse due to limitations in communication, or simply a lack of education on healthy sexuality and sexual abuse. Now, if your child has a disability, you need to teach them the importance of body privacy, appropriate boundaries, and the whole role of consent. An open communication must be established by having ongoing discussions about healthy sexuality, because this child is 3 times more likely than any other to be sexually abused. Now, if a child has communication difficulties, if the handicap is communication, you need to provide a way that they can report abuse that will sufficiently meet their communication needs, right? So whether it's drawing, whether it's sign language, or some way that will meet the need of your child. And if a child suddenly starts to display change in their behavior, you have to consider the possibility that these could be responses to abuse. And if abuse does occur, it needs to be reported immediately. And there are many signs of a child that is abused. One day we will talk about it, how to identify if a child is being abused or has been abused in the past, and certain dynamics that you can do with your child to try to find that out. And so this would be kind of like a car who needs a lot of maintenance, right? A child with disability. You need to be very careful when driving on the road, and you need to make sure that this child has all the needs met in order to protect herself. And last but not least, number 10, children that do not have corporal autonomy and have not received sexual education. So we've talked for 3 lectures now on how sexual education is the most powerful tool in sexual abuse prevention. So the child that receives no sexual education or has no connection with the parents, they are by far at higher risk. So sexual education will protect your child, and your child will protect himself. Both are extremely important, right? The child needs to learn how to protect herself, and you need to learn how to protect your child. But they cannot be separated. One is not more important than the other. That's why you need to learn about it, and you also need to teach your child. And I don't know about you, but your child, my child, usually speaks to me about things that I speak to her about, right? Things that I've made a way open for her. Let's talk about, family relationships. Like recently, my oldest child has been asking a lot. Like, she's understanding family dynamics, so she wants to understand everything about separation, marriage, divorce, people that lose the spouses, if they can get married again. It's like she's very interested in that, and we've openly been speaking about it, and she knows that it's an open way. And so your child will speak to you about the things that you usually speak to them about. And corporal autonomy is a child that can care for her own body, right? So if you don't teach your child to do her personal hygiene, to learn how to clean her body parts, even at a young age in the shower. Allow her to train that, even if you have to touch it up afterwards. Give her the chance to learn that. A child that doesn't know how to wipe herself after using to the bathroom, they end up being a lot more exposed because in your absence, somebody else is going to have to do that for her. So dynamics and music and games can be used to teach kids about sexual education. We've gone through some of them, also abuse prevention. So concluding, if you don't lead your child, somebody else will lead them, right? If you don't teach them, they're going to learn somewhere else. And if you do not correct them, if you're too permissive, they will not know what is right and what is wrong. If there are no consequences, there will be no change. And if there's no criticism, there will be no growth. And so a child needs to be taught, needs to be led, needs to be corrected, and needs to be trained. And I will finish with the Bible verse that says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. Proverbs 22:6. Teaching a child sexual education is a way of leading them to God's kingdom, because it will protect them from these evil outside influences that could even damage their relationship with God. A lot of people who are sexually abused have difficulty in maintaining a spiritual connection with Christ because they're still struggling a lot with inner problems that they've had in childhood. Now, changing your car oil, your car tires, putting new windshield wipers, those are all efforts we can make. But the biggest effort we can all make by placing our child away from being the most at-risk child is prayer. And if you pray for your child and you dedicate her to the Lord, angels are watching over us all the time, and they're there to protect us. We cannot be presumptions. We should not put ourselves in situations where we will be more vulnerable to abuse or our children to be abused. But we can't be afraid. We can't just get so anxious about it that we can't even talk about it, or that we overload our children with information that are unnecessary for them at their age. We need to learn to trust Jesus and to do our best as parents. And if by any chance abuse occurs, that we're able to communicate, the child is able to communicate, we're able to identify, we're able to deal with the consequences that have left in the child and prevent it from happening again in the future. God forbid it happens once, but it's not necessarily all under your control. And this is why we need to really surrender it to the Lord and to ask for wisdom daily. So I hope that it's a blessing to you. I hope that if you've identified some characteristics in the 10 that were listed that your child has, that you're able to change that, to turn it around. You don't have to get desperate. Oh no, I can see 3 or 4 that I'm doing here. Don't get desperate. Just flip the coin and start looking for new ways to really take your child away from being the most at risk and other children that you're familiar with as well. So God bless, and we'll cut off now for questions. Oh, do you want us to pray? We'll pray before the questions. All right. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for loving us. Thank you so much for promising to care for us. And thank you so much for the promise that when we train our children the right way, when they grow old, they will not forget. They will not forget, Lord. I pray that as we look at all these characteristics of a child that's most at risk for abuse, that this may not bring us anxiety or fear, but that it may bring us awareness and change. Information is only healthy if it brings change and awareness. And I pray that this information may open up the eyes of parents and teachers and friends, and that they may be wise instructors and counselors to their children, and take them away from being the most at-risk children. And if by any chance there are circumstances where they cannot be taken away from, such as disabilities or blended families, that you may give the parent wisdom to instruct their child and to connect with them, to have an open relationship with them, where they know wholeheartedly that that child trusts them with information, with needs, with situations, and their fears and their anxieties. And I pray that if by any chance we're being neglectful, I pray that if by any chance we're being authoritarian parents, I pray if by any chance we're being overly permissive parents, or that we have not had any connection with our children, or we're too stressed, that we are making our home stressed, that you may help us to reform, Lord. I know it's under your power to give us victory over this, as long as we are willing and we put ourselves out there with effort and prayer. And I pray you may help each one of us. And please be with all the families, Lord, with all these children. They are yours, and I know you suffer to see them being abused, sometimes even in their own homes. So please protect them. I pray in Jesus' name, amen.